We are joined this week on our Power and Politics segment by Marc Molinaro, the congressman here from the 19th District in New York. Congressman, thank you for joining us here tonight.
Glad to be with you. Thanks
this
very
is
much.
our version. We're in his office. This is our Power and Politics at the Capitol, so Thank you for having us here. I want to start with your record so far in your freshman year, or freshman tenure, you could say. What is making you so bipartisan at the end of the day? Second most bipartisan of all of Congress by a watchdog.
Yeah, listen, I told people when I was elected that I would work with anyone who's honest and earnest about solving the problems that face upstate New York. And I was serious about it. And so what that's meant for me is not only being the second most bipartisan member of Congress, but actually the fifth most effective member of Congress, House and Senate. And we've worked with Republicans and Democrats on everything from expanding access to mental health services to supporting our veterans, ensuring support and resources for those with intellectual, physical, and developmental disabilities, to providing support and assistance to law enforcement, from securing the border to confronting the opioid crisis facing this country. And so 34 separate pieces of legislation, 5 bills signed into law, 11 adopted out of both houses, 11 in larger bills, really important measures meant to provide the best for the people I serve.
Do you have one you're most proud of by any chance? You just mentioned a lot of things.
I did, the short answer is no. The long answer is every day I spend a lot of time listening to the people I serve, whether it's the 11 town hall meetings that we've had, or the roundtables on agriculture, or meeting with local community organizations and listening carefully and learning from the people I serve. They have priorities. Their priorities are my priorities. And so for me, we use every opportunity. In a big bill, I might find some provision that tuck in there that expands mental health support to servicemen and women, because we know that that's a concern. It could be a piece of legislation on border security, and we forward a provision that ensures that we're confronting sanctuary city status, like those that are established in New York, and how that's undermining law enforcement. And it's a whole package of Think Differently initiatives meant to support those with intellectual, physical, and developmental disabilities.
You mentioned the border, and President Biden a few months ago had his executive actions, and last month, June, three-year low in border crossings. Do you think his executive actions are working? Do you want to see more?
It was a half measure, and it was after he created the crisis. Remember that President Biden comes into office, undoes, by executive order. He chose to use his authority to undo the Trump border security policies, and because of it, nearly 11 million undocumented individuals have crossed into this country. Now, what's even worse is not only are they simply crossing into this country without the proper background or asylum-seeking reviews, but this administration is actually transporting people. And so when there are those who complain and are concerned about the governors of Florida and Texas doing that, I think it's wrong too. I don't think we should be treating human souls that way. But 70% of those who are transported to other states and cities around the country are done so by this administration. And so we've seen this crisis only growing. And because of undoing those, by executive order, undoing those measures, we've seen criminal activity, whether it's a 15-year-old in the Capital District, we know sexually assaulted, or a murder in central New York, or in Delaware County, we saw an undocumented individual arrested for DWI, released because of New York's cashless bail, and then reoffend, holding hostage and taking and abusing an individual and a young woman and her daughter. All of these are clear indication that this administration has surrendered the southern border to drug cartels. And then you look to New York. Sanctuary city policies, sanctuary state policies, and the desire by the governor and others to ignore the crisis that's been created. So we're forwarding a piece of legislation actually to help address the incident that occurred in the Capital District. Law enforcement should know whether or not an undocumented individual has committed a felony. And if that's the case, we need a database to prove it. Now, I believe that if you're undocumented and you're arrested in that nature, you should be deported. But until states do that, there should be a national registry so that law enforcement in Albany, law enforcement in Delaware, law enforcement in Binghamton can simply look up and identify whether or not an individual has a criminal record, and then can confront that head on. And police will have the resources to better do their job.
You mentioned sanctuary city state as a reason for that. Right now, they are allowed to give fingerprints or turn, if someone is in jail or prison because of that. What is different about this legislation that would differentiate from something they can argue already do as a sanctuary city or state?
Well, so New York State and New York City by extension, or more specifically, actually denies interaction between ICE and local law enforcement. And so we had this incident in Delaware where, in fact, law enforcement was directed by the state, executive order that Governor Cuomo put in place and Governor Hochul has supported, that prohibited interaction. So local law enforcement wasn't communicating with federal law enforcement, and therefore this individual who had committed a crime was able to go back out on the streets. And because of policies, by the way, like ones that my opponent supports, to allow for catch and release, because, like cashless bail on steroids, right? Because law enforcement is precluded from actually apprehending, individuals are allowed to repeat offend. And there is no central location where law enforcement can identify whether or not an individual, undocumented, has committed a felony. Now, there are other states that have policies that allow this to happen more aggressively. And if somebody in as I said, in Rensselaer County, a police officer can check this database and find out this individual committed a crime in Alabama, that will inform them and enable them to respond more effectively.
We're at a time where we're coming off of the first presidential debates. Yeah. We're coming off an interview from the president, one-on-one at that. A lot of questions out there. Yeah. What do you make of the situation now when it comes to both these candidates at their ages running for president?
Well, first, what America saw in that debate between President Trump and President Biden, I think that President Trump, they saw what they expected to see, right? I don't think there's any surprises. People formed their opinion in that case, right? But in the case of President Biden, I think Americans saw what a lot of people have been seeing for many months, but too many on the other side of the aisle, and in some cases, the media have kept from the American people. Listen, obviously the job is very demanding. The president showed in that debate that he's just not able to carry out another 4 years, and pretending otherwise is both cruel and maddening. I mean, I think it's compassionate and respectful to acknowledge that he is not capable of committing another 4 years. But if there's this continued effort, again, Democrats, my opponent, others, to simply sort of rally around him, not acknowledge what is clear to anyone, I think is just it's just not right. It undermines the election. It undermines democracy as well.
There have been calls for President Biden to step aside,
yeah.
But why not the same as a Republican for former President Trump, who is a convicted felon at this point, who has been seen slurring words and bringing up people that aren't alive at some of his rallies? Why not call for him to step aside as well, considering his circumstances?
Yeah, again, I don't think Americans saw or see anything in President Trump that they didn't necessarily expect. And with all due respect, I know Alvin Bragg. The mobilization of that lawsuit was intentional, and instead of allowing the electorate to make up their mind, just by the way, as Democrats precluded any competitive primary in the case of President Biden, instead of allowing American voters to make that determination, they used a local district attorney. I mean, the third in line in the Department of Justice goes to work.
There was a jury there.
I understand, and I don't undermine the jury. I think the jury did what the jury was asked to do. But clearly, the system. There's a reason why Alvin Bragg's predecessor. There's a reason why the Department of Justice, and there's a reason why Federal Elections Commission would never have prosecuted this case. Hell, even Andrew Cuomo said if his last name wasn't Trump and he wasn't running for president, that case never would have been brought forward. You and I live and work in New York. You know there's some real creeps who hold elected office and who have done some really bad things. And very, very infrequently is there a criminal prosecution. This, again, should have been left to voters. That said, I don't think that the kind of deterioration we've seen in President Biden is comparable. Listen, again, he's given himself of service. 4 years as president is an overwhelming responsibility. It truly is. But he clearly is just not capable of serving another 4 years.
Just one more follow-up on Trump. There are other cases against him. There's election interference. There's classified documents. Alvin Bragg not necessarily involved in those. Is that still a concern?
Well, I think clearly we continue to see the criminal justice system used as a means of influencing a campaign and one's political opponents. But again, the decisions that have come out of the Supreme Court and really the prosecutors themselves are going to have to determine whether or not those cases are still able to be adjudicated.
We have NATO, the summit coming up here. What do you expect from that? What do you want to get out of that? What do you want to learn from this?
Well, listen, I think this is critical, and I've said this. There's a reason that I join my colleagues both sides of the aisle in supporting our efforts to prop up and protect Ukraine. We obviously have to do more to assist Israel, and the Indo-Pacific is critically important to us in pushing back from aggression from China. NATO's a critical alliance, and America needs to be able to assert its leadership in the world. The world is safer when America is strongest. And I do think that our NATO allies and NATO partners obviously need to know that America is serious about standing up with its friends, right? Standing up for its friends, pushing back against Hamas in the attacks and the terror against Israel, and making clear that in preserving safety and security here at home, America must be strong abroad.
What kind of balance does there need to be when it comes to Israel and Hamas? We've heard people call for a ceasefire, and then we've also heard Israel has a right to defend themselves, and then people say, well, they're also committing a genocide. What is the right move there to help, I guess, save as many lives as possible?
So I'm going to say this because you use there's no moral equivalency. There is no balance. Israel has every right to remove Hamas from the face of the planet. Hamas' only function is to eliminate Jewish citizens and to eliminate Israel. That's its function. And those who want to live peacefully in their own nation, in their own society as Palestinians, must respect Israel's right to defend itself. War is ugly. It is awful. I mean, I'm in the midst of reading the David McCullough book on Harry Truman for the second time, by the way. We've lived through some of the most horrific experiences, whether it's World War and the Holocaust or what we're even seeing today. There is no moral equivalency between what Israel must do as a democracy in the world and Hamas's existence.
Should that come at the expense of innocent civilians?
It never should come at the expense of innocence. It should never. Innocents should not have their lives at risk. They're in the midst of war. Hamas initiated that act of aggression and war against Israel. The way to protect innocent Palestinians, innocent Jews, is for Hamas to turn over the hostages. And we should not blink once. We should make clear that the only way that you end war is by turning over the Americans and the Jewish citizens who are being held hostage.
Back closer to home, you've been calling on the Governor Kathy Hochul when it comes to OPV to allow that be part of the treatment for an opioid overdose. Why is that?
Because there are far too many people suffering from substance use disorder. And I say this very respectfully. No one chooses to be an addict. They may have made a choice that led them down the path of addiction and substance use disorder. Narcan is a great tool. We have several pieces of legislation to expand access to ensure greater access to Narcan. Great tool. There are other tools in the marketplace that also should be available to those who want to confront substance use disorder. OPV is one of them. And I think that ensuring that there's broad access is important. And the other, I'll tell you, it's not only about confronting overdoses, critically important, but we have to do more to expand access to mental health supports and treatment, whether it's recovery coaches and leaning on people who've lived a life of substance use disorder, or it's access to community-based mental health services like the ones I launched as county executive in Dutchess, which is now, by the way, the state model. The state has to do more. We, the federal government, must be sure that Medicaid dollars flow to states to ensure access to community-based mental health. And if we confront addiction, substance use disorder, and mental health concurrently, if we do it holistically, we not only can prevent overdoses, but we can enhance the quality of life for people who struggle really hard.
You're coming up almost on 2 years here.
Feels like a lifetime.
In this role. That's what I was going to ask you. What have you learned both about this role, about this place, and yourself over the course of this time?
I love doing this work. You know why? So as an executive, obviously, I spent a lot of time organizing and running a municipal government, addressing major localized issues. I'm the voice for people who often are overlooked, a part of the state, upstate New York, from the Capital District, across the river, over the mountains, southern tier, Ithaca. It's 11 counties from Rensselaer to Tompkins County, all points in between. This is a part of the state and country that knows what it's like to be ignored, and we've seen far too many of our families and businesses leave. I'm the voice, and I have to somehow synthesize 750,000 opinions and try to articulate on their behalf how important their issues, their concerns, their families, farms and small businesses are. I love that challenge. It is a wonderful, remarkable thing. And to do it here, a kid who grew up on food stamps, once the 19-year-old mayor, using every one of those days of experience to fight for the people I represent, it's so, so valuable and so, so fulfilling. Now, what I will tell you, the partisanship here sucks. Your viewers know it, and I feel it too. Sometimes I've articulated my frustration in a way that is not in my best interest. And what I tell people is this place is unnecessarily frustrating, but there are great moments that are tremendously fulfilling. raises and salary increases to servicemen and women, the debt ceiling, which enhanced support for those who need access to food stamps. I can run the gamut, and I would, but the successes are fulfilling, and knowing that the people I serve, and this is the opportunity to speak for them, really critically important.
You mentioned what you learned here. What's something that people don't know about you as a person?
Well, I do like people to know that I am the proud father of 4 kids. I think some people know that one of my children was born with a disability, which has really kind of informed me as a parent.
Inspired some of your legislation too.
Yeah, it has. But it's also a challenge. My wife and I see it every day. There are so many that feel overwhelmed, don't know the resources available, and we know it's a struggle. And so we find time to be of help. As a fellow who's got a child on the autism spectrum, works at one of the restaurants here, I just happened to meet him, talk to him, and he's needed help navigating special education. So I'll take his call and we'll walk him through it. My wife and I do this quite often.
Yeah. And your brother's legislation aimed at jobs, right?
Yeah. Say again? Aimed at jobs.
The legislation aimed at connecting an individual with a job.
We have about 10 or 11 think differently bills. One of them would enhance the ability of the Small Business Administration to actually connect employers who want willing employees to find those with intellectual, physical, and developmental disabilities, employment opportunities. But it's really important. I tell people this all the time. There's almost like an acceptance of this prejudice of low expectation, that there are people who see those with disabilities as not being able to achieve something, therefore they lower the level of expectation. We should be demanding of ourselves and others to really engage, to get individuals of every ability active and engaged in their own lives, their own success, their own independence.